Welcome again, everyone. We've now reached part 2 of the 1820 Radical Uprising. It's quite an exciting tale. We've got Tom Dowds with us again, and I mean, if you did see the first part, you know he's a really, really good storyteller.
And we'll put the link to part 1 in the notes, and if you haven't listened to that one, we suggest you listen to that first, then come back to this one. Now, on with our story.
The trials. Now, the government is, in, as I say, in panic mode. Will a Scottish jury convict? So they decide that the trial should be held under English law. In Scotland, they send up John Hullock, one of the most senior lawyers in London. He will lead the prosecution. They appoint Sir Samuel Shepherd as Lord Chief Baron of the Exchequer in Scotland so that he can be advisor in English law, because the judges will be the Scottish judges. The clerk who takes the notes, he's Thomas Knapp from London. Then, of course, the law is different because in England you have to have a grand jury. In other words, although the prisoners are there and they're legal representatives, they don't have a word to say. You present the evidence. This is the evidence we have. Is it enough to go to trial? And the grand jury decides, that's all they decide, yes, it goes to trial. So they have these in Glasgow, Stirling, Dumbarton, Paisley and Ayr. If we start the Stirling one, which is the first. Jeffreys challenges the right of Mr. Hullock to plead in the Scottish court, at which case Hullock explains, and the judge explains, it has to be done. And the judge says, there will be no reporting of any of these trials until they are all concluded.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Charge 1. This is that they were compassing and imagining the death of the king. Charge 2 is levying war. Then, under more recent acts, compassing and intending to depose the king from the style, honour and kingly name of the imperial crown of the realm. Charge 4, compassing to levy war against the king in order to compel him to change his measures. That's the simple bit. Charges 1, 3 and 4 comprise 19 separate charges under each of those headings, including, and I'll take them at random, assembly together and making speeches to incite the subjects to rebellion.
Shall we do that?
Assembly, levying war. In fact, basically, persuading somebody to be on strike.
Yeah. So when it says imagining the king, does imagining mean what we mean by imagining?
No, it's in the sense of you are planning to.
Okay, right.
But you've made a very interesting point. I'll explain why later. These are the charges. When the trials actually take place, the actual trials, not the hearings, the grand juries, Jeffreys challenges again. This time, why are we putting these charges? We have not identified the ville, as it was called, where this happened. And Hullock gets to his feet and he says, I do not see the need for this. Anyway, in Scotland, is there any place that's big enough to be a ville? And as for the legal system, he's sitting with a team of Scottish lawyers behind him. And it is said that one of the team, the High Sheriff of Stirling, takes a piece of paper, scribbles it, and he passes it across the table to Jeffreys, who opens it, smiles and bows to him. The judge intervenes to say, no, there's no need to make these comments, Robert. The note read, challenge the bastard to a duel outside of my country, i.e. Stirling, and I'll be your second. I have a theory here. I think that's the beginning of the end of the trials, because he's alienating his own team. As it is, Hardie's brought up first, and they produce evidence that he prevented a bailie in Glasgow tearing down this placard about the strike. The bailie's name? Hardie. And you couldn't make this up. You know, you've got a Baird and a Baird and a Hardie on opposite sides. And he's going to crop up every so often in these trials. When it comes to the actual evidence of what happened, Ellis Hodgson is amazing. He describes what happens. And he goes on to say how brave the men were in challenging the troops and the stiff resistance they put up. And the judges are sitting there scowling at him. He's a soldier. He appreciates the enemy. Nicol Baird is then sworn in. And he says, well, he was coming from his farm, as he was entitled to do, to go and look after the animals and then come back on duty. And he met this huge crowd of radicals. And they threatened him. So he drew his pistol, pointed it at them, and threatened to kill them. And he then raced with them information to Kilsyth. And Hardie's sitting there saying, we never saw him. Nobody saw him. But remember, the man who could have verified that no, he hadn't seen him wasn't called. The witnesses explain all that happens, and to cut a long story short, Hardie is convicted. But the judge says, in English law, unlike Scots law, you need only one reliable witness. But in this case, you have two. You have Lieutenant Hodgson and Trooper Baird, the man who's just perjured himself. So it takes them just over an hour to come back guilty.
Yeah.
So they then swear in another jury and they put Baird on trial. And would you believe that they bring the same Justice of the Peace, Hardie, in from Glasgow to tell them what happened in Glasgow? That had nothing to do with Baird. But it's this declaration of calling the strike and not wanting a Scottish government. They don't go quite far enough to say the Republic. But that's the idea, is they're sowing this seed about republicanism, French connections, Jacobitism, bloody massacres, as in France. They've got that constant theme hammering through it.
With that background and that kind of thinking, do you think that was why there were, in some cases, severe penalties given?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There was going to be no mercy shown, except maybe they underestimated some of the Scottish jurors. Yes.
It seems like a funny mixture of, like, you know, you were saying there was a doctor who sort of said, oh, this guy's too ill to move, and then he goes skedaddle out of it. And a mixture of sympathy in some places, and even in unlikely places, but at the same time, actually, it's all getting swept up and brought to naught, isn't it?
The problem is, you see, there's going to be an official statement. Remember, these aren't being reported. They aren't public. Don't report them. Shut people's mouths up when Baird and Hardie are found guilty. People know it as soon as, before there's any press could be published, then the rumours spread.
Yeah.
Jeffries realises that there's going to be absolutely no hope of these people getting off. So he suggests to them that they plead guilty and put in a plea for mercy. Lord Boyle does something quite unusual. He says they're found guilty. The only sentence will be that of capital punishment. So he sentences them to death by hanging, beheading, and their bodies to be quartered and disposed of at His Majesty's pleasure. And then adds, I trust that mercy will be shown, but I think for the leaders, Baird, Hardie, and Cleveland, Glasgow, I doubt if mercy can be shown. The difference is each one of those was an ex-soldier. And these were the men with experience that they could teach others. And if you get rid of them, they then troop off to Glasgow. And the cabling men, by the way, are going to be tried later on. So they get to Glasgow, set themselves up in the High Court. Wilson is brought in, and they have all the usual stories about he reads the wrong radical publication. And again, the council argued that doesn't prove he's a violent man. They even bring people in who say that because he marched at the back of the column, he was actually reluctant to take part. But the jury finds him guilty. But here's the interesting thing. The foreman of the jury says, we find him guilty of levying war. None of the other charges. Oh, by the way, on the first one, they don't find him guilty in all 4 counts. Only 2. And the judges immediately drop the other 2 charges for all the rest of the people.
Wow.
The levying war, they were found in arms in the battlefield. You can't argue you were levying war. But Wilson's different. And the jury say, yes, they found him guilty of one of the overt acts, one of the 19. And they recommend mercy. Well, he's 65. He's by standards of the day, a very old man. But he has a long, long history. He's been involved with the Friends of the People. He's been involved with the Society of United Scotsmen. I think Mike Donnelly once said, if they're going to hang anyone, it'd have been Wilson. He was a pain in the butt to them. You know?
Yeah.
So he is found guilty. And the judge says there's no choice but to pass the death sentence. I wonder if it was deliberately said that. Because you're never going to know what the next verdicts were when the Glasgow juries were sworn in for the next people. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Only Wilson is found guilty.
Yeah.
So they then moved to Dumbarton. Now, I see this as a critical time. Most people don't, but I see this as critical. John Hullock has already made a reputation. Sir Samuel Shepherd has been in there telling the juries what to think. You will find them guilty. So they go to Dumbarton and they put the first of the Dumbarton men on trial. And yes, he was in strike. He was seen reading this terrible proclamation. It's variously referred to as a proclamation, the address, or a piece of trash, as one of the witnesses remarked. And the evidence. So they call the manager of the mill where the strike took place. And they say to him this reported thing. He says, oh, he's one of the most trustworthy men. So when Sanford, I think, was the defence lawyer, he said, I'd like to call character witnesses. Lord Boyle says, there's no need. The prosecution have already signified their good characters. So he points out that they were in the forge. Arms were made in the forge, but there's no proof that they ever touched the arms, saw them, let alone. So it comes to summing up to the jury, and Hullock has already said, these men, if they were on strike, they imagined the death of the king. It is as simple as that.
Well, how's the link between going on strike for a day and imagining the death of the king? It seems,
Yes,
I mean, I've been on strike for a few days in my time. And,
respecting the law and imagination. So, Boyle's summing up, he says, it is undeniable that a large amount of treason was committed in the midday that day. However, in my mind, the problem would be if these men were involved in it. But that's for the jury to decide. 20 minutes later, not guilty.
Not guilty.
And then the critical moment, I feel, Sir William Ray, Lord Advocate, gets to his feet and says, well, my Lord, in light of the fact that it's the same evidence we've produced against the rest of these men, we'll drop the charges against them.
Yeah, aye, interesting.
So they take off, but they do one thing before they go. They release the 7 Greenock prisoners from Dumbarton Castle. Now, remembering the atmosphere of the time, if you're one of those 7, you keep your head down for the rest of your life. And after the trial at Dumbarton, the man in charge of the jury, Admiral Fleming of Cumbernauld, they agree, yes, there are charges. And he returns to Cumbernauld and sends a message to Kildare, get the hell out, they're looking for you. Have you ever watched the film The Young Victoria?
Yes.
You know how there's a naval officer she fancies?
Yeah.
His name was Fleming.
Oh, right. Oh, right.
He has
Right.
contacts. He also was, by the way, this Admiral Fleming, he and the later King Duke William IV were mates in the Navy. So he can get away with things that others wouldn't. Judges then appeared at Paisley. And by this time, Hullock had suffered the reverse and he disappears off. We back down to London. He's got his convictions.
Yeah, the ones he wanted.
Death sentences.
Yeah.
He's in Stirling and Glasgow. He's off. He's happy. But Shepherd is still there. Shepherd at Paisley decides he will actually, several times he interferes with the prosecution case. He takes over and demands. They put up the spears. He was on strike. And there's loads of information about being on strike. Yes, he was giving out these leaflets, i.e. the proclamation, and he was encouraging people to go on strike. So all these are witty things, but do the proof treason. So when I wrote the book, I had this, I read through, in fact, the trial documents, I've got them literally here. You can actually read. There's an aside. In those days, your trial started and it went on till the end. They didn't have this sort of, let's stop for lunch and we'll stop at 4 o'clock, we'll be reconvene tomorrow. No, they would be there till midnight, if necessary. In fact, they were. In this particular one, the basement, they were till well after midnight. The only candle is on the judge's desk. So when it gets dark, if you're a shorthand writer or reporter, you can't write anything. You have to do it from memory. The trial documents cannot be found. There is an official ledger of trials that says volume 33 covers this period of trials for high treason. And it starts, page, got the title page, turned over. A number of trials have not been included in this because they have been regarded as less important. Not one of the Scottish trials is recorded. The important thing, I think, is this. If I can jump ahead to the end of the trials. As soon as the trials ended, Thomas and Art was told to take all his documents back down south and finish them off, and the decision would be made where they would be deposited later. We don't know. They just seem to have disappeared. I mean, a number of people have been through Register House, and you can get the writs, you can get even the statement, you can get a lot about the trial, but not a written record. But the only written record we have was taken by a reporter by the name of C.J. Green. And he could, as I say, while the light was good, get verbatim. When it became dark, it was more difficult. So what he does do while the light is on, fortunately, he records some of the answers given by some of the witnesses. And the one that sticks in my mind is, were you armed? No. Were you carrying anything? Yes. What were you carrying? A stick. Was there anything on the stick? Yes. What was on the stick? A thing. Was this metal? Yes. Was it a pike? No. It was with a metal on it. Is a pike? No. It was a stick. And at that point, the neutral Sir Samuel Shepherd leaps to his feet and says, "You're lying." No. And eventually turns and says, "I have never heard in my life, and I hope never to again, hear such dreadful perjury in a court of shit." And off he goes. So then, he's not the only one. It then goes to Sir Michael Shaw Stewart, Baronet, is the foreman of the jury. So too is a man whose name will probably ring a bell with you. James Coates. J and P coats.
Paisley?
So the judge advises them the man was on strike, and that is one of the overt acts. So the jury retires, and after a couple of hours, Michael Shaw Stewart returns with the verdict. We find the prisoner guilty of the, I think it's the 17th overt act under the 50. He finds him guilty of being on strike, but we can't find him guilty on the main charge.
Mm.
Lord Boyle said, but if you find him guilty of one, we have some difficulty in doing that, my lord. So they call Sir Samuel, who explains to them, if this man was on strike, he imagined the death of the king. A juror, this is what the record shows, a juror. We can't know that. We can't know what was in his mind. Yes, but his actions clearly show, no, they show he was on strike. You will go turn. I thought we were to find on the evidence produced. Of course, but he's guilty of being on strike. Therefore, he imagined the death of the king. No, you only proved he was guilty of being on strike. You haven't proved he imagined the death of the king.
Yeah, yeah. Good for them.
You will go and find him guilty. I thought it was for the jury to decide that. Of course it is, but the law quite clearly states. The second time they come back, same decision, special verdict. So once again, he berates the jury, tells them, no, get back and do what you... Michael Shaw Stewart comes back, and the press report says, with a huge smile on his face, he says, we have reached a verdict, my lord, and that is not guilty.
Oh, well.
Wow, it's just fantastic, isn't it?
There's uproar in the court and outside. And Shepherd demands that they all be arrested. Lord Boyle says those outside are committing no crime. If there's any more disturbances inside, and at that point, Sir William Bray stands and he addresses the Lord Advocate. You have something to say. He says, yes, my lord. We are dropping all charges throughout Scotland as a result.
Yeah.
So happy ending.
Well, for some, but not for one.
Not for everyone.
The ones who were transported, some of their descendants are still in Australia. One of them, Nia McCulloch, she sent me a copy of an extract from the Sydney Gazette, 1837, the year the transported men got their pardons, when the Scotch radicals held a meeting I think it was a right bloody great booze up, and they proposed 4 toasts. One, first, to King William, who had granted them their pardons. To Baird and Hardie, who gave their lives for freedom. To old James Wilson, who died for his principles. And then to Alan Kerr, the stubborn juryman at Paisley, who refused to be one man.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
The executioners, the hangmen, it was beneath their dignity to behead someone. So a medical student, the name of Thomas Moore, volunteered for the job. He did the one in Glasgow and Wilson and the other 2. The axe, the gown, and indeed the wee block with J.B. on it, John Baird's grave marker, are all in the Smith Institute in Stirling. When you go in, as you go through on the left into the exhibition, there's a case on your right. You will not miss the black gown and the axe. They sit there side by side.
So, and the fact that they were given such a harsh punishment, and you've explained the context and why, you can kind of imagine them being afraid that this was the start of, another French Liberal Revolution, the American Revolution. But it really, that's why we're still talking about it, is because of what happened to them rather than what they did.
What the government did was counterproductive.
Yes.
Not immediately. And I think that's the important thing. It became But even today, there are people who want to mention this. This is why it's not so well known.
Their fate sealed, Baird and Hardie were marched to the public execution place. In memory of John Baird and Andrew Hardie, who were publicly hanged here on the 8th of September 1820 for the cause of justice and truth. We're in yet another cemetery. This one, beautiful, wild, looks very old, quite extensive. And this is Sight Hill Cemetery. And Marlene has spotted what we're here for, which is to look at Baird and Hardie's memorial. Now, we were in Stirling Cemetery a few weeks ago, where Baird and Hardie were first buried there, but then they were disinterred and they were brought here, and this memorial was erected to them, and it's a rather handsome memorial erected by public subscription to the memory of John Baird, aged 32. I didn't realise they were just quite that young. Andrew Hardie was 28. I thought they were in their 40s because they were former soldiers, but no. Who, for the cause of freedom, suffered death in Stirling, 8th of September 1820. And as we said before, their last words were, "Remember Baird and Hardie," and here we are, 200 years later, remembering them. Oh, and here's more. Here lie the slain and mutilated forms of those who fell, and fell like martyrs true. Faithful to freedom through a time of storms, they met their fate as patriots always do. Despising death which ne'er can make souls something. Calmly they viewed death's dread and dark array, then heaven directed turned their prayerful eyes. Serene in hope they triumphed o'er dismay. Their country's wrongs alone drew forth their sighs, and those to them endeared by nature's holiest ties. But truth and right have better times brought round. Now no traitors scorned by passing breath. For weeping Scotland hail this spot of ground, and shrines with all who fall for freedom's faith, whose sons of hers knew something made glorious by their deaths. Wow, there's bits of it that unfortunately you can't quite read, but it's I get the sentiment.
There's more around the other side.
Is it? Oh wow. Oh, here's more. During the erection of this monument, the committee applied to Her Majesty's government for permission to remove the mortal remains of the two martyrs from Stirling to this spot. And after a lengthened correspondence, the following letter was received from the Lord Advocate from Whitehall in London. Sir, I have laid the memorial for the relatives of Andrew Hardie and John Baird before Secretary Sir George Grey, and I have satisfaction of informing you that if the Kirk Session of Stirling see no objections upon other grounds, opposition will not be made on the part of Government to the removal of the remains of these unfortunate men from their present place of interment. But the permission is given under the express condition that the removal shall take place without any public notice or intimation, and that any procession or concourse or attendance of people, but in the presence of a few friends only. Well, up yours, Andrew Rutherford. In accordance with these instructions, the exhumation took place at an early hour in the morning of the 20th of July, 1847. That's quite a long time after. And the remains reinterred in front of this monument on the same day in presence of a considerable assembly of friends. Here then they rest, and far in future years shall freedom dew this spot with memory's tears. It's really quite emotional, isn't it?
It's very touching. And here then they rest, and far in future years shall freedom dew this spot with memory's tears.
And then there's a whole load of names for their part in the 1820 Rising. The following, originally sentenced to death, were transported to New South Wales, and in 1835 were given a royal pardon. John Anderson, John Barr, William Claxon of Clarkson, James Cleland, Andrew Dawson, Robert Gray, Alexander Hart, Alexander Johnson, Alexander Latimer, Thomas McCulloch, Thomas McFarlane, John Macmillan, Benjamin Moore, Alan Murphy, Thomas Pike or Pink, William Smith, David Thompson, Andrew White, James Wright.
So they were sent out 1820, 15 years for the pardon, by which time they would have worked their, indentured, and they would be kind of free out there. I wonder if any of them came back.
Some of them would have stayed, I'm sure.
I expect most of them would stay.
It's wonderful that they've got this, and it's like Wallace's monument, public subscription, people, because they're just ordinary people putting their hands in their pockets because they care, and if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have heard of them.
And okay guys, you can do it, but we're not having any marches. No public nuisance.
Keep it quiet, no pictures.
These guys, they were certainly brave. They were maybe a bit, you could say, naive, because, there wasn't a chance of it actually succeeding. But were there any sort of positive things that came out from it, a bit further on for Scotland?
For Scotland, not really. I think they set an example, and the problem is they set an example that the Chartists, for example, didn't want to follow. You don't use physical force. But for Australia, their arrival could not have been better timed. Only 3 were executed. Even Clann was pardoned, but his was the day before his execution. They were sent to Australia. Robert Macquarie was the Governor-General. Robert Macquarie, a Scot, he replaced a very famous gentleman, Captain Bligh of the Bounty fame. He became governor, and another Scot by the name of MacGregor, a captain, said to him, this country is ripe for turning into a fabulous colony. And that's what they wanted to do. And now come a batch of Scots, educated, because they all could read and write. Skilled, because they weren't all weavers. There were printers, there were bookbinders. There was a range of names. And they were all told, finish your sentence, 200 acres of land is yours. This was for everyone. It wasn't just the Scots, but particularly the Scots. They sent out Lord Brisbane, another Scot, to replace him because he's been too soft with the prisoners. He should be punishing them. And Brisbane came out, we will not have this. What's going on? Oh, what a wonderful idea. And he carried on what Macquarie was doing.
You're such a great storyteller. It's just kind of great to kind of sit back and listen to you. Fiona, we'll need to put in a link to how to get hold of Tom's book, won't we? And
oh, yes.
If you order it through Amazon or something like that.
What's the title of it?
Scotland Free or a Desert.
Could you just say a bit about what the 1820 Society is, how it came about?
If I can predate the society, because I think the society in a sense has roots. During the time of the Chartist movement, they looked back to the 1820 Rising, and they wanted to identify a link with the Martyrs. And it was they who got the first monument built at Sight Hill to Baird, Hardie and Wilson. Later on, at the turn of the century, the end of the beginning of the 20th century, it was I'm going to say labour movement, but I think, we're talking about the early days of the socialists. They identified, and they were all for this, when they had people like Keir Hardie and others. So they identified with it. So they held meetings at the monument. And then, of course, as now, I have to carefully phrase this, as the more radical elements of Labour drifted away and they became a political party, I feel like they became politicised, that became a bit less respectful to be seen there. And the 1820 Society in the 1960s was set up. Now, the first thing they did was they renovated the monument because it was in a bad state. And up until COVID, there used to be a rally the first weekend in September, usually Sunday. They had the banner, Scotland Free or a Desert, although they misspelled it. They spelled D-E-S-S-E-R-T, and it was D-E-S-A-R-T originally. They had a march, usually with a piper, and then there were speeches and wreaths were laid. Well, obviously, along came COVID and screwed that up something awful. 2021 and 2022, there was only one person there.
Fair enough, really. Yeah.
To lay flowers. The other places we go to are Woodside, because there were radical disturbances in Paisley. But there again, you would expect that. It's Paisley after all. Its radical tradition is really long. Oddly enough, Stirling wasn't a place we went to very often. I think because after the executions, the bodies were taken back to Glasgow, and it became a kind of focus. The other place we go to is Greenock, of course, where the massacre took place.
Do you think there'll be a second, outing from the 1820 to get from the 1820 Society? Is it planned?
At the moment, they're actually planning. I would hope this would become a regular routine. That every year we would have a spring to match in with the radical war, and one later, because if you go in August, that's the time of the trials.
Yeah. Fiona and I were in Stirling just the other week, and we were making a point of just going to the toll booth, and then there's that plaque. There's various plaques that you could go and have a look at. Yeah, I mean at that point, even a couple of weeks back, I didn't have all the details in my mind that you've just given us, but I knew a bit. It's very moving, actually. That you're just standing there where these guys were executed. I'm certainly of one of the generations that never got taught any Scottish history at
Me
school.
too. I spent 30 years teaching in secondary school, and I know exactly what the system is. You teach to the exam. If it's not in the book, you don't teach it.
Yeah. I noticed you mentioned Elspeth King, and I met her, it was a Zoom meet. It must have been at the beginning of COVID, and Mary McCabe got Elspeth to come and give a talk to Glasgow pensioners for independence. She was talking about the effect on Scots and Scots society of living in a country where you're not taught your own history. She was just really passionate about it. It's a really good talk. And I think that was when it really dawned on me about, but when you think bigger picture, you've got a whole population, and it really doesn't know much. I mean, I think it is changed. I mean, there is a bit more taught in schools.
From the 70s, I think there was a wee bit more Scottish history. I mean, when I was a principal teacher of history, I was constantly being pulled up. Why are you teaching that? Why are you teaching that? And for example, the first potato field in Scotland was in Kilsyth. Why are you teaching that? Why should the people... Kilsyth's up the road. The kids I'm teaching come from Kilsyth. Why should they not know their own history? When I was at school, I was a proud possessor of a higher history. And remembering my age, my parents' generation went through the war, and I could never, as a kid, get my head around the fact that men who'd served in Africa held Erwin Rommel in such high regard. I kept thinking, their men were trying to kill you. His men were killing you. And you still think he's bloody great. So I became fascinated with Rommel. When I left school and was doing something else, I wasn't doing history at the time, for light relief, I always read, there's a book in Elder Park Library, Rommel. And I read that the German High Command had war-gamed 2 battles where infantry had defeated cavalry. One was at Courtroom, and the other was at Stirling. Now, my higher history kicked in here, and I thought, I know, they must both be in the Low Countries. Courtroom certainly is. You can imagine my shock when I sat and read the second one, and it said Edward's army crossed the border at Berry into Scotland.
Wow. Stirling. Wow.
What? Rommel knew more Scottish history than I did, and he didn't have a higher history from a Scottish school.
Good.
Oh, well, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. It's been absolutely fascinating. Fabulous stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Really enjoyed it.
Yep.
That's the end of our story. Hope you found that as interesting as we did. Hope you enjoyed Tom's storytelling like we did. And so we just want to say a big thank you to Tom Dowds for sharing his expertise with us, and to the 1820 Society for getting in touch in the first place. And it does sound like a really, really good thing that they're doing to try and get annual bus tours organised. So we'll put the link to where you can find out more from the society in the notes.
Yeah. If you're like me, maybe you hadn't even heard of the 1820 uprising, radical uprising. I hadn't. The only reason I did find out about it was through a friend of mine, Mary McCabe, who's one of the members of the 1820 Society. So I just really appreciated, being able to delve into this with folk who have been fascinated themselves for years and years and are passing it on. So yeah, thanks again to all of you in the 1820 Society.
And if you didn't know the story, why not share it with somebody else? Let's get this story out there. It's a fascinating part of our history.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it from us. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.